600 kilometers from the southeast coast of Africa lies a unique solitary island. The first navigators, impressed by its forests, believed it to be a land of sinister spirits whose mournful voices called them to the dense vegetation from which there was no return. In reality, this island of ghosts is a living laboratory, an isolated legacy of a world which disappeared millions of years ago. Madagascar's history has been entirely independent from the rest of the world. Here, animals and plants have taken their own evolutionary path. And the result is an island with its own particular life forms, a fragile paradise inhabited by almost 200,000 different species, of which over 150,000 are found nowhere else on Earth. Extraordinary habitats concealing fascinating, unique, extravagant creatures. This is the unknown legacy of the Triassic world, in which each species is endemic and each animal an independent response on the long evolutionary path. "65 million years ago, Madagascar, and with it some of our earliest ancestors, set out on a lone voyage. On the continent, brutal competition gave rise to diversity, but here on this independent island, without competitors or pressure, unique, fabulous creatures developed. When people came to Madagascar and saw these strange animals, they called them lemurs, a word which for the Romans signified the soul of the dead. And humans, a species which had evolved in the continental world, quickly began to clear the forests, burn the pastures, and mercilessly hunt down these Pacific creatures. Today, the lemurs are seriously endangered, and in a race against time, the international community is trying to find ways to safeguard the future of these spirits of the Madagascan forest. The incredibly rich fauna and flora of Madagascar is due to the isolation in which it has lived for over 60 million years. A long time before mammals evolved, when the dinosaurs ruled over the Earth, the southern supercontinent began to break apart to form what are now Africa, Asia, South America, Australia, and the Antarctic. At that time, Madagascar was joined to Africa on one side and on the other to the large mass of land which today forms India. 35 million years later, India and Madagascar separated from the continent. 80 million years later, India continued on its way, finally crashing into the continent of Asia, while Madagascar remained isolated in the middle of the Indian Ocean, like a reminder of a now extinct world. More than an island, Madagascar is a continent in miniature. From north to south, a rock formation 600 kilometers long divides it in two, and this and the sea that surrounds the island create very different climatic areas. As a result, Madagascar has many and very different habitats. The jagged peaks of Ankarana, called Shingi by the locals, are part of the rocky heights which separate the different worlds of this wandering island. To the west, the land gently slopes down to the sea, whereas to the east, an escarpment runs alongside the coastal strip, breaking the winds from the Indian Ocean, which release their rains and so give rise to the tropical rainforest. Winds, currents, escarpments, and latitude, these are the ingredients which make up the diversity of life. Just one large island, but here we will find semi-desert areas, thorny and deciduous forests, mountain regions, and exuberant tropical jungle. A mosaic of ecosystems which make Madagascar a synthesis of the distant Gondwana, the long since disappeared southern supercontinent. The variety of climatic areas gave rise to an incredible diversity of ecological niches, and isolation made each one of them unique, with animals found only here, the result of thousands of years of evolutionary adaptation. No one knows for certain how many exclusive species live in Madagascar, because every corner, every tiny niche is occupied by some specialist who knows how to take best advantage of it. A rhinoceros chameleon hidden on a fern leaf in the Perinet Reserve observes as a millipede goes by. This is just one of the more than 70 species of chameleons, all of them endemic, which live in Madagascar. In this world of chameleons, survival depends to a great extent on remaining unnoticed. But here it is another reptile which has the most complete disguise. The geckos of the Uroplatus genus are the greatest specialists. This one, a giant leaf-tailed gecko, is virtually invisible even when it is right before your eyes. Only from the side can you see that the tree bark is hiding a fierce nocturnal hunter. The ability to imitate brings a twofold advantage. It allows them to get close to their prey and also to hide from predators. So, success in the competition for the best disguise can mean the difference between eating or being eaten. And here on the island of camouflage, it is a strategy adopted by all in one way or another, from the smallest to the largest. A Parsons chameleon, a giant over 60 centimeters long. Despite popular belief, it is not their ability to change color that makes the chameleons masters of camouflage, but rather their incredible adaptation to tree life. Their bodies, laterally flattened, allow them to move more easily across the branches and also increases the surface area exposed to the sun, speeding up their internal mechanism. Their swaying movements make them look like leaves shaken by the wind, and their feet and tails ensure a firm grip. The toes have fused together into two opposable groups to better cling on. Their tails give them balance on even the most unstable branches, and their independent eyes mean they can look in all directions while they remain immobile, calculating the distance and angle of attack. And then they use their secret weapon, a long, projectable tongue. No lizard on Earth is more specialized, and none is such an expert hunter. Such is the diversity of chameleons in Madagascar that they account for half of all the species that exist in the world. But not all of them are easy to spot. This is a bruchisia, a leaf chameleon. The bruchisias are the smallest chameleons in the world, and so even a small lizard represents a serious threat to them. Unlike the rest of the chameleons, these diminutive members of the family, no more than 3.5 centimeters in length, live among the dry leaves of the jungle floor. The leaf chameleons cannot radically change color like their tree-living relatives, but down on the ground that ability is not needed. All that is required is to resemble one of the many dead leaves that cover them. And that is precisely what the bruchisias imitate in order to remain unnoticed. The other extreme is represented by this, the largest chameleon on Earth, Parsons chameleon. As large as a cat, it is evidence of the extent to which the isolation of Madagascar has created unique creatures impossible on the continent beyond the Mozambique Channel. All the ecosystems of Madagascar are in themselves rarities, independent experiments of nature which have made them unique. But this uniqueness also makes them incredibly vulnerable. They know no other life but that of isolation. It was this same isolation that converted the original primates of the competitive continental world into the most emblematic animals of this land of peculiarities, the lemurs. A group of Verus cephacas is feeding on leaves in the Barenti Reserve in the south of the country. Like all the other lemurs, they are descendants of the original proto-simians, which came from the continent. Over millions of years ago, in the early stages of primate evolution, a number of different ancestral groups arrived on the island, already independent from Africa. Their relatives in the rest of the world died out, unable to compete against more specialized primates, but here they survived and evolved independently. And in the interior of Madagascar, an exclusive zoological group developed. The cephacas' prehensile feet and hands enable them to live an essentially arboreal life. And their tails, which some of their close relatives have lost, not only serve to grip onto the branches, but are also an excellent counterweight to balance all their acrobatic movements up in the trees. In spiny forests, deciduous forests, or intermediate forests like this one, the Verus cephacas' main food source are the leaves during the dry season and the fruits and flowers during the rainy season. A diet adapted to a changing climate has been a decisive factor for many of the animals of Madagascar. Because here the climate imposes severe restrictions, survival tests with one main factor in common: water. The climate of Madagascar is tropical, humid and wet, but the mountain range which divides the island breaks the winds coming from the east over the Indian Ocean. Thus, the further west you travel, the less rain there is, and the summer monsoons originate in the north, then pass over the island, becoming less intense, with less precipitation as they move southwards. These two factors determine the variations in climate on the island. The further south and west, the greater the drought and the heat. Levels of humidity in turn determine the distribution of species. These injuries receive the beneficial rains in their aerial shelters of Analmatharotra, a reserve within the jungle strip of the east of the island. The injuries are one of the species of lemur that can be found only in the rainforests of Madagascar, and these forests would not exist if they did not receive copious rains coming from the Indian Ocean, and the jungles more than return this favor of nature. The vegetation cover of the jungles and forests is an insurance against evaporation and soil loss. The trees retain the rainwater and gradually return it to the atmosphere in the form of transpiration, so it can again form clouds in a constant cycle. And during this slow water cycle, the precious element is available for all the living beings of the ecosystem. Where there's water, there's life. No other Madagascan ecosystem is as rich in species as the rainforest, but the majority of the animals are so small that they can be easily overlooked. It is believed that in Madagascar there are over 100,000 species of invertebrates, and here beneath the Amtomboka Falls in the Montagne de Ambre National Park, 2 of them are engaged in a life and death struggle. The cicada knows that an injection of venom from this golden web spider will mean certain death. But the spider did not weave its circular web in order to hunt animals as strong as a cicada. Once the insect has recovered from the fright, it uses its muscular legs to free itself from the sticky death trap. Precipitation determines the mosaic of ecosystems on this chameleonic island. From the rainforests in the east to the spiny forests in the south, Madagascar contains different worlds making the maximum possible use of the available water sources. And in each one of these changing worlds, an army of tiny invertebrates has remained hidden since the time when the island separated from the continent and began its separate evolutionary path, diversifying into the strangest, most astonishing forms. These are flatted bugs. From the rear of their abdomens, they secrete a waxy substance which they spread all over their bodies until they look just like tiny lichens on the tree on which they live, and so can hide from their predators. At the other end of the island, in the depths of the dry deciduous forest of Ankarana in the north of the country, another animal leaves the safety of the branches in search of fruit. Fruit constitutes almost 90% of the diet of the crowned lemurs. In groups of from 5 to 15 individuals, they feed in the lower levels of the jungle with lookouts posted to ensure the safety of the group. Though the large predatory mammals were left behind on the continent when Madagascar broke away, evolution has also produced powerful assassins in the land of the lemurs. Though they are carnivores, the ring-tailed mongooses are no danger to the crowned lemurs. The diet of these mongooses is composed principally of small rodents, eggs and chicks, reptiles and all kinds of invertebrates. So the lemurs, once they have identified the intruders, slowly regain their composure and, drawn by curiosity, come closer to investigate the hunters. Despite having identified them by both sight and smell, the crowned lemurs do not entirely trust the intruders. There are females with newborn young, and this makes them extremely wary. So, dangerous or not, they decide to keep a safe distance between their children and the carnivores. Among the crowned lemurs, the two sexes are very clearly differentiated. The male, more brightly colored, shows no fear of the mongooses once they have been identified. But in all social species of lemurs, it is the females that take the decisions, and so they follow the mother to the safety of the higher branches. Mongooses continue their search for food, oblivious to the tension up above them in the trees. Perhaps the lemurs do not realize that the mongooses now hunting among the dead leaves on the ground are also extremely skilled, agile tree climbers. The females of the group of lemurs quickly spread the alarm as the mongooses move closer, and so the mothers can move off in time. But for the males, hunger is a more pressing priority, and they leave their families in a safe place and, despite the warnings and threats, go down to the ground in search of fruit. Everything seems calm, but then the air carries across the smell of death. Males and females are immediately put on their guard. They have detected the scent of a civet. The civets are the largest carnivores in Madagascar, and they do feed on lemurs. When they are around, nowhere is safe, neither the ground nor the trees, because they can climb up and leap from branch to branch with incredible agility. So the entire group of lemurs makes a run for it, moving deeper into the forest. But this time the civet is not interested in them. It is following a trail left among the dried leaves, not by a crowned lemur, but by another civet. For a few days, the couple will be interested only in each other, giving the lemurs a short respite. But not for long. After all, lemurs make up fully 50% of the diet of this strange Madagascan hunter. In Madagascar, there are only 8 species of carnivores. The majority of non-vegetarian animals live by hunting the tiny invertebrates that colonize all levels and ecosystems of the island. So the majority of them have not even been discovered by science. The survival of all vertebrate animals depends to a great extent on this invisible army. This collared iguana is hunting crickets on the floor of the Ampijoroa forest in the northwest of the country. Like all species in the dry regions, it also feeds on fruit and leaves, but these tasty bundles of protein are simply too good to let go. From up on a branch, a pair of rollers has also detected the movement of a cricket among the leaves. The pair takes turns in hunting and are almost always successful. The iguana is not at all happy at having poachers in his territory, and the rollers are always stealing his prey. During the rainy season, after the monsoon, there are more insects available, and that is when the roller chicks will hatch, concealed and protected inside the tree trunks. This is a time of abundance, an opportunity that must not be wasted. The iguanas are powerless against the aerial competition of the rollers, but this territorial male remains vigilant as he hunts. Among the iguanas, territories are often invaded as they chase a succulent prey, and our male has detected an invader. The spiny tails serve as a warning. They become nervous, their bodies tense. In this territory, there is room for just one male, and anyone who wants to hunt here must be prepared for battle. But fighting requires a great deal of energy, which may not be compensated for by the crickets they manage to hunt down. So before fighting, there is an entire ritual of warning threats. The owner of this territory will not easily back down. And as usually happens, this Cold War of visual signs and dissuasive displays ends with the retreat of one of the contenders. In the Anamalothotra jungle, the atmosphere is also tense. A chameleon has spotted a competitor in his territory, and he sends him a serious warning written in the colors of his body. The color of the chameleons is not determined by their surroundings, as is commonly believed, but by their mood. In plain terms, this is their body language, and this one is clearly saying that he will not put up with strangers on his territory. Beneath their skin, they have cells full of pigments. When they are resting, they open the cells containing yellow and blue pigments, giving them their typical green color. When the animal becomes excited, the cells containing brown pigment open up, making their appearance increasingly dark and threatening. And these are not empty threats. If the warnings are not enough, the chameleons will use other, more direct methods. Fights are extremely violent and merciless. The opponents bite each other, each trying to immobilize his opponent as they try to find a way to throw him off the branch on which they are fighting. But though they are very spectacular, in general neither chameleon is badly injured. The colors indicate the state of the fight. For a while, both remain still, clinging to each suspended from their prehensile tails. This is a rest for thought, a brief armistice. The invading chameleon becomes convinced that it would be better to look for another nearby territory without such a formidable defender. He admits defeat. Using the body of his rival for support, he climbs back to the safety of the branch and starts to retreat. But the owner of the branch is still not sure of the intentions of the defeated rival and refuses to let go until he too has climbed back to a position where, if the fight were to continue, conditions would be equal. Only then, when he clearly sees he has won, will he let the invader make his humiliating retreat, now dressed in light colors, while the winner waves the flag of victory with scales of intense dark hues. The Jungles and Forests of Madagascar are a book in which the story of a different evolution has been written, an evolution parallel to that of the rest of the world. The interiors of these jungles contain the living legacy of a world which no longer exists, the legacy of the largest of the continents. This explains why the flora of Madagascar is more like that of the West Pacific than neighboring Africa, And it also explains why almost 90% of its 7,300 botanical species can be found nowhere else but here on this island. In these jungles lost in time, some animal species destined to disappear in the constant competition on the continent survived. And the hand of time, over millions of years, shaped the most astonishing collection of zoological rarities in the world. Like all lemurs, these white-fronted brown lemurs are one of these privileged children exclusive to Madagascar. Nowhere else on Earth, in no other jungle, in no hidden corner, are lemurs to be found. And this, though it gives them a certain distinction and extraordinary zoological value, also makes them incredibly vulnerable. Because nowhere else in the world will the lemurs or any of the other endemic species of Madagascar find a place to live. And this dependency on their environment is bringing them to the very edge of extinction. Ignorant of the advancing deforestation of their island, the brown lemurs peacefully feed under the protection of the Nosy Mangabe Reserve, a small protected island in the northeast of the country. Further south, in the same belt of rainforest, a black and white ruffed lemur is carefully watching another group of brown lemurs. Here too, in Alamathaotra, their habitat is protected, thereby assuring at least their immediate future. The tropical rainforest is the richest ecosystem on the island, and food is plentiful, so species which in other areas of Madagascar compete, here share their territory and even play together. The survival of the lemurs depends on the rainforests of Madagascar, but the opposite is also true. Pollination and dispersal of the seeds of many of the plants in this exuberant jungle would be impossible without lemurs like these ones, whose diet is based on flowers and fruits. So the legendary ghosts of the Madagascan jungle are to a great extent responsible for the survival of the jungles and consequently of all the other species that share this humid habitat. Paradise warbler is out hunting. After the rains, they too, just like the rollers, bring their young into the world under the protection of the dense vegetation. The parents take it in turn to bring insects for their ever-hungry chicks. The ancient jungle gives them food, and the new generations are born into a world of seemingly unlimited resources. They don't know that just 10 kilometers to the south, the entire jungle is being devoured by an invading species infinitely more voracious than they are. Just over 1,500 years ago, man arrived in this forgotten paradise. Crops can't be grown in the jungle and the dark interior terrified them. So with their fire and axes, they began to cut deep wounds into a world which had remained unchanged for millions of years. A 1,000 years later, almost 30 species of large Madagascan vertebrates had disappeared forever, including 15 species of lemurs, some of them as big as gorillas, and the elephant bird, the largest bird that has ever existed on Earth. The open jungle gave way to new ecosystems, and the continental species that were able to reach the island immediately took advantage of this. The majority flew here like this black egret, hunting by attracting the tiny fish beneath the shade of its wings. But many others were brought by man, his cattle and his pets. Wild animals were replaced by domesticated ones, unique, astonishing species by others more common and more practical. For many of the endemic species of Madagascar, this was an absolute calamity. Their exclusive habitats, fragile pieces of a world apart, simply disappeared. And many of the species of the jungle fell prey to the bullets and traps of invading humans who saw them as simply a source of meat, or in the majority of cases, sinister, frightening beings, the old ghosts spoken of in Latin texts. The superstitious stories of the first inhabitants are understandable considering their ignorance. Night in Madagascar is full of shadows, many of them alive. When darkness falls, other lemurs come out. They are the inhabitants of the most ancient night in the world, the unknown primates of a land lost in time. In all the forests and jungles of Madagascar, night brings out these graceful, inoffensive ghosts. While a northern lepi lemur feasts on berries 15 kilometers to the south, a white-footed lepi lemur, a close relative but adapted to the spiny forest of the dry region, stands guard on a branch of the euphorbias on which it feeds. But the lemurs are not the only nocturnal species. The giant jumper rats also wait for the cover of night to emerge from their holes. And at that same moment, up in the trees of the mountain jungles of the east, a tiny mouse lemur sets out its nightly round in search of flowers, fruits, and insects. Wherever you go in the Madagascar night, there are small beings with large shining eyes scanning the shadows. They are the ghosts, the spirits of the jungle which still today terrify the people of the island. And none inspires so much superstitious fear as this one. It is the strangest, the weirdest nocturnal lemur, the ai-ai. It is so strange that scientists were unable to correctly classify it until 1850. Like those of the rodents, its teeth never stop growing, and its third toe, long and thin in order to extract the larva from the wood, is unique among the primates. The truth is, everything about it is unique. And the fact it is so completely different from all other known living beings was the reason it almost disappeared.
There's another lemur of Madagascar that is really very unusual, very bizarre in fact, and it just demonstrates, I think, why Madagascar is so important from the animal point of view to the world. And that's the lemur called the ai-ai. It's sort of scary looking. You know, it's black and it's got its its ears swivel around, it's got these very long, strange fingers. And in fact, the local people, most of them think of it in very bad terms. They think it brings bad luck, and they will actually kill it on sight. So that's one of its problems in Madagascar. Of course, its main problem, like all the other lemurs, is the destruction of its habitat.
Since the time man arrived on the island, this self-contained world has been disappearing at an increasingly rapid pace. The majority of the human population of Madagascar lives in rural communities which directly depend on the surrounding land and forest. Slash and burn techniques open up the jungle forever, rapidly destroying the home of hundreds of endemic species, a biological legacy unique in its isolation, an evolutionary treasure that the scientific community is fighting to defend even before it has been able to fully understand its enormous importance.
Madagascar is so important from the point of view of animals, plants, and indeed of conservation, because it's been isolated for such a long time. The scientists think that it broke off from Africa 160 million years ago. Now, I can't even imagine, contemplate how long that was, but that's a good long time for evolution to have taken its course, and that's why the animals, the plants of Madagascar are found there and nowhere else in the world. What also happened was that human beings arrived in Madagascar about 1,500 years ago and began to do what human beings all over the world do when they come to a new land, and that is to clear the forests, open land for their crops and their animals, their pastures. And the forests of Madagascar today, they're probably only about 15% left of what they originally were. So a number of species have already become extinct, and the species that are left are under the gun, so to speak. They've not got a lot of time left. So Madagascar is really a perfect place for us at the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust to be concentrating our efforts.
Pioneers in the conservation of Madagascar's ecological heritage, the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Foundation has become the greatest guarantee of the survival of many species of animals in the world. Jersey Zoo is, unlike others, much more than just cages and fences. It is an example of the conservationist spirit of its founder, the eminent naturalist Gerald Durrell.
My husband, Gerald Durrell, was passionate about animals all his life from the time he was a child. And all he ever really wanted to do was to go out to the wild places and collect animals and bring them back for zoos. Well, he came into a little bit of money when he was 21, and he spent it all on setting up these expeditions. And he went out to Africa, South America, and began to collect animals, bring them back to zoos in Britain. But what he started noticing was that the animals didn't survive long in those zoos of the day. He also noticed that going back to places where he'd worked, the animals were fewer, or maybe they had disappeared altogether. The reason being the activities of human beings around them. You know, they'd cut the forest for farming, or they'd overhunted the animals, or something like that. And Jerry decided that what zoos needed to be doing was to be helping the conservation of wild animals, of species that were becoming endangered. And he saw that most of the zoos of the day were not doing that, and he was determined to start a zoo of his own that would be devoted to saving endangered species. You know, good breeding programs, building up their numbers, with the idea one day of returning those animals to the wild places where they belong.
This was a revolutionary idea for the zoos of the world. The animals are not simply put on display, but above all are conserved. But in order to do this, it was necessary to work not only in the park, but also in the country from which the animals came.
Our organisation has always had a tradition of not just working with animals in captivity within our zoo grounds, but also a very strong commitment and focus to developing programs actually in the country where the animals occur. And we do that by, first of all, we have to have an official strong relationship with the government of these countries, so we have official accords with the government of Madagascar so that we can work and develop programs within the country, and also it means that we work and train Malagasy people. They will come to Jersey for training. We will send staff out there to work with them in the field, and we have been able now to set up captive programs for some of the animals actually within Madagascar and within our own grounds in Jersey as well.
The actions undertaken by the Foundation in order to save species are based on local education and awareness raising, seeking to make the forests and their inhabitants profitable for the human communities. It is a slow process, and the people who live from the jungles they are trying to conserve cannot always wait that long. So the conflict becomes a race against time. These Faroese sifakas watch as day by day a little more of their jungle disappears. Humans need the land for their crops and the wood from the trees for their houses. And against the most highly evolved of their relatives, these legitimate owners of the lands of Madagascar have no rights. Where once there was dense forest, there now stretch wide fields of sisal, and time is running out for the sifakas. Many species will never have the chance to become profitable. Before they do, they will have no habitat, and so no future. The sifakas, like so many other endemic species of Madagascar, cannot survive in the open fields created by man. And 40 years ago, Gerald Durrell, suspecting this could happen, acted in order to avoid disaster.
Our founder, Gerald Durrell, came to the Channel Islands in 1959 and chose this property, Les Aigres Manor, to create his zoological park. He felt the need for this because he had been travelling wildly in the tropics and had seen for himself the destruction of the tropical forests. And he decided that by bringing the techniques of captive breeding, particularly concentrating on endangered species, he could make possible their eventual return to the wild state. Of course, this means that we are today some 40 years old. Increasingly, the world around us is being impoverished by the destruction of the tropical forests and, of course, other natural areas. And the species that live in them are at an increasing decline. We naturally, as conservationists, wish to play our part in the decision-making process in the utilisation of the natural resources of this world in a better way to try to ensure that we do not deplete the natural species with whom we share this planet.
The ecological wealth of Madagascar is in serious danger. Man, a newcomer to the island, has destabilized the delicate process carefully designed by evolution over millions of years. Since humans arrived, 80% of the vegetation cover of the island has disappeared, taking with it the hopes of many of these unique creatures of an independent ecosystem. Hunters and prey, elusive vegetarians or powerful carnivores all depend on the exclusive habitats of this world apart, a world which has lost the isolation that made it invulnerable. Today, virtually all its natural heritage is threatened. Organizations like the Durrell Foundation are providing solutions, but solutions which, in order to become effective, require time. And time is the one thing many of these extraordinary creatures, the silent ghosts of the jungle of Madagascar, do not have.